Hi everyone, this is Justin Paperny, and what you see behind you is the baseball field at University of Southern California, my alma mater. And I'm showing this in the background because, well, I made a mistake. Last Monday I completed my 100th career lecture at USC. My first lecture was in September of '09. And last week I did my 100th lecture. And to celebrate it, I went over to the baseball field and wanted to get creative and have some fun and essentially just post an impromptu video following this lecture. I thought everything went incredibly well until after enduring a lot of traffic in Los Angeles, I pulled into Katsuya, a sushi restaurant in Encino, was enjoying some sake, went to listen to the video, and realized there was no audio. Apparently, I can film a video and give 100 lectures, but I'm unable to flip a switch, and therefore nothing was actually recorded. So just to memorialize it, or to keep for posterity, so to speak, I wanted to film this video and keep it playing in the background, although you won't hear anything. But I'm going to essentially recreate and go over exactly what I said during these lectures. And when I open up some of these lectures, or some of the, through some of the 100 lectures I did at USC, I'll open up the lecture and ask some of these business students at the Marshall School of Accounting, what do you think of white-collar crime sentences? Are they too long? I shared my story. Is 18 months for what I did for securities fraud long enough? I'll talk about some of my other clients who share stories I'm allowed to share. And at the Marshall School, students are required to read Ethics in Motion, my second book. And I can't tell you that every student buys the book, but about half of them do. And I'll say, okay, you read Chapter 3, Joshua, CFO from Chicago, was 21 months fair. You read about my client, Brandon, a doctor, was 5 years fair. And when I ask this question at the beginning of the lecture, many of them say, I think the sentences should be longer. They're not long enough for the damage they caused. And then sometimes at the end of the lecture, after I've told the story, and to hammer home the massive consequences that accompany white-collar crime, damage reputation, the losing of licenses, the pain and shame, creating victims, etc., they'll say, wow, the prison term might not be the hardest part. It really is a lifelong, enduring stigma that accompanies this conviction. And I think part of the reason they feel that way is, if I may give myself some credit, is partly the way that I tell the story. And telling of the story is something that I am a huge believer and advise all federal defendants to do well. It's something that you have to own and tell organically and be able to tell as easily as you breathe or brush your teeth. I am convinced of that. And what I learned at the end of these videos, at the end of some of these lectures, is when these students will say, these aren't bad people. I could have done that. And I remind them by saying, I'm not saying you could have done that, but I do believe and wish to express here in this video that while good people do make bad decisions without considering the influence on their life, some defendants take it to a whole nother level in the way that they prepare, and that's something that students touched on. For example, in Ethics in Motion, Chapter 3, my client Joshua did not have criminal intent. By any measure, if you were to read this story, and I'll happily send you this book, it's free, you'll read in Chapter 3 I wrote that my client had access to $2 million a day in capital as the CFO of this company. But what led him away was some slow, poor, bad decisions over a period of time where he was submitting expenses through a company charge card, and some of those expenses were personal, and he had the company reimburse them through some rationalizations. He believed he was entitled to some perks of the profession, and just like that, it's mail fraud because the company paid the bill every single month to American Express, and that bill included some personal expenses that he claimed were business. Just like that, no criminal intent, he's on the wrong side of prison boundaries. Compare that to my client Steve in Chapter 6, a tax accountant out of Florida, who from our very, very first call said, Justin, from the day I got into business, I was out to skirt the laws, to be aggressive, to cheat, to be unethical. That's the way that I advanced my interest to the benefit of my clients who ended up paying less in taxes, and it grew my business. So the students were amazed at these two stories of one client that had no criminal intent, who just made some bad decisions while giving into some of these useless rationalizations. My client in Chapter 3 got 21 months compared to my client in Chapter 6 who got a year and a day. They both hired me at different parts of the journey. but it proves the point. Whether you had criminal intent or you did not have criminal intent, the criminal justice system can treat you the same way. And I get so many calls from great defendants, wonderful people, fathers, husbands, businessmen, and women who will say, I did not have criminal intent nor wake up with intentions to defraud and to rip off people, yet the government wants to send me to prison longer than the orchestrator of this fraud who has been cooperating. The criminal justice system is twisted. So these students were a little taken aback that those who had criminal intent could receive less of a sentence than those who did not. And I'll tell you, more than 95% of the wonderful men with whom I served time did not have criminal intent. It was a case of turning the other way, willful blindness, of not fully considering how their actions could be construed to be criminal by prosecutors who, of course, are out to advance their own agenda. And through 100 lectures at USC, the takeaway is the same. Initially, they wanted to punish. The sentences are not too long, these students will say. Then at the end of it, they'll say, wow, maybe the prison term isn't the worst part. Maybe they don't need to be any longer. Maybe as taxpayers, I don't need to continue to warehouse these people. The stigma is so significant. And that's what I'll close with over the next few minutes. The video, or the title of this blog or this video, is a little misleading when I talk about the top federal prison consultant or the best prison consultant. I received a call, and I wrote a blog about this a couple of weeks ago, from a lawyer who said he was been a lawyer for 17 years. He was a U.S. attorney for a long, long time, educated, smart, and in my research in him, is a fairly good lawyer, but he was not open to some of the strategies that I suggested for a client of ours. And he called me and said, Evan says you're the top prison consultant. The reality is, it was not said in a flattering way. It was not complimentary. It was very condescending. It was really rude. And I chuckled inside when I heard it. And the truth is, when I just got out of prison, I would have responded differently to this lawyer. I would have immediately gone on the defensive and said, well, I wrote a blog in prison, I wrote this blog, and I have a book, and I've worked very hard to reconcile and make amends for the bad decision. That was in 2009 when I got out of prison. I had nothing else to hold on to. Now, years later, with case studies and clients and testimonials and a process that I've created, very much like getting into USC. I mean, I prepare for prison and the consequences that accompany a conviction, much like preparing to go to college. Daily incremental action. You need to block out time on your calendar every single day to prepare and be able to get away all of the fluff or noise that can distract you. So this lawyer was not complimentary. He was a little insulting. Further, he said, how can you be the best prison consultant if you only served 18 months in prison? And again, he was on the offensive. And I was patient, and I said pretty politely, if you gauge the success of a consultant based on how long they have served in prison, then I would have been out of business in 2009. And if you're looking for longevity or someone who has served a longer prison term than me, there are plenty of other places to go. And I think it naive that someone would gauge the effectiveness of someone's work based on how long they served in prison. I said, I'm sorry I wasn't a worse criminal. I'm sorry I didn't make worse decisions. I'm sorry that I didn't work more poorly with my lawyer to serve potentially a longer prison term. And he found that a little bit amusing. I said, let's get to the point why you're calling me. What is the concern that you have right now with our client, Evan? To his credit, when I spoke with Evan, he said, I want to do all I can to prepare for the best possible outcome. You know, a lot of defendants say that, and many of them actually do it, but to do it really well requires, at times, holding a lawyer accountable to a degree that, frankly, some defendants are uncomfortable with. And it can be tough to hold a lawyer accountable. I'll give you an example. My wife and I, our young daughter, we had a nanny a while ago. And occasionally I didn't love stuff that the nanny did. It just sort of frustrated me. And I was afraid to say something to her because while I wasn't watching, I thought in my own catastrophic thinking, oh my God, what if she doesn't take the best care of my daughter because I've upset her? I'll just stay quiet. And to a degree, it can be similar with defendants holding lawyers accountable. I do not want to upset him. I need him. He's going to write the memo. He's negotiating. He knows this attorney. I do not want to upset him. So instead, they stay quiet and do very little at times. And I shared this analogy or story with my client. He said, my lawyer told me when I hired him that he'd be willing to take my feedback and advice. I want to get the best possible outcome. It's me that's going to be serving time in prison, not him, not you. I have a wife and kids. I want to get home, and I'm willing to do some uncomfortable things in order to get there. And I said, okay, fine, let's do it. So one of the strategies that Evan and I worked on was writing a letter for the pre-sentence interview. And it was a narrative. I think it was well done. It showed the lessons learned, the remorse, the contrition, the embarrassment he felt, putting the victims first and recognizing there had to be consequences for actions. And in closing, in this narrative, we conveyed to this judge why he'd never be in the courtroom again. So the narrative was done. He said, okay, we have to send it to your lawyer for his review and feedback. We need his blessing. And that's when the lawyer called me and was very, I would say, almost defensive by saying, Evan says you're the best prison consultant. Hey, I like this letter you guys worked on, but there's no way I'm turning in this in at the pre-sentence interview. And I said, well, why? And he said, I'll turn in this letter for the sentencing hearing in the memorandum. And I said, I know I'm just a prison consultant and a former stockbroker and, real estate agent and not a lawyer, don't negotiate pleas, never been to law school. I just have a, psychology degree from USC. But logic tells me that if we're trying to influence the judge who is going to sentence our client, it would make sense that we would try to influence the probation officer who is going to write this report and make a recommendation on how long our client could serve in prison. Further, I'd send the letter to the prosecutor, to the pretrial services officer. Also, getting it included in the PSR could someday influence the case manager and counselor who are going to assess the remorse of our client and how long he or she might end up serving in the halfway house. And someday the federal probation officer who's going to oversee his release for 36 months is going to read it. It would make sense that we get it in front of every stakeholder. And he was very quiet for quite some time. And I just really sat here listening or waiting for him to say anything. And he said, I've never done that, implying that because he's never done it means it's the right way. So I'm respectful of lawyers. I work with a lot of lawyers. I get a lot of referrals from lawyers. Some are terribly opposed to me. Some don't want the oversight. Perhaps some want all of the fees. I want to be careful about not indicting all of them or issue a broad brush generalization. I'm not sure. Some of them are opposed to a former prisoner and writer and speaker offering advice on how a white-collar defendant can prepare for the best outcome. But that's what I am. I'm a former prisoner and executive who, as well as any of you watching who are immersed in the system, fully understands the consequences that accompany a criminal conviction. And I regret not making better decisions. And the better decisions came for me in part when I went to prison and I met Michael Santos, who guided and coached me along the way. But many of you might not have that mentor today. I'd love to be that mentor. If not me, find someone who's going to hold you accountable on a daily basis and who will encourage you to make some recommendations and some suggestions that could be uncomfortable, including the suggestion that my client said, I don't care what my lawyer says. Logically, this makes sense that if we're going to influence the judge, I want this probation officer to know that I did not have criminal intent, that I own what I did, that I made bad decisions, that I'm ashamed. Essentially, we want this probation officer to feel like these business students at University of Southern California felt at the end of my lecture. Well, this is a good person who made some mistakes without considering how it would influence their future. Yes, that is what we want the probation officer to think and the prosecutor to feel and the judge to use as a determination in the low end of the guidelines of the prison of your choosing, the program of your choosing, like RDAP, for example. I am convinced of it. I will tell you, at the end of this call, this lawyer was receptive and said, okay, I see it. I'm going to do it. And what went from an initial call of calling me the top federal prison consultant in a very rude and condescending way. Again, it was not a compliment. I want to make sure I hate to say this title is misleading. Maybe it's a little bit. In no way could he insinuate that I was the best consultant, in part because my client has no other consultant that he's hired. Just like he has no other lawyer that he's hired. He doesn't have enough data to really even gauge or judge who the best federal prison consultant is, just like who the best lawyer is. Sometimes defendants say, I got the best lawyer. So how do you know? You're not a criminal. You have no idea if they're good or bad. This is the only lawyer you're going to hire in your whole entire life. Same thing with me. If I'm the only consultant that's going to be hired, I have to embrace the reality that there is very little comparison. And that's part of the reason I have to go above and beyond to make my clients feel, or those who invest in my programs truly feel that on a daily basis they're making the best decisions and I'm playing an incremental or a part in that. So I guess this is probably a little longer video than I filmed last week, but this gives me an opportunity to add on to it a little bit. I'll close with a couple of takeaways. Whether you have intent or criminal intent, it does not matter. The criminal justice system is twisted. They are going to judge you based on your response. Own it, acknowledge it, hold that lawyer accountable, and implement some strategies that I believe put you in the 1% of defendants who are really prepared and really willing to have the best possible outcome, and that includes doing some things that could be uncomfortable or may at times seem contrary to what others might be telling you. I think that's the reason decisions you make should be rooted in transparency and data and case studies. So don't be afraid to do that. Now, on a personal note, I do get some questions every month. I'm going to answer a few. Let's see. As a reminder, if anyone wants Ethics in Motion, don't buy the book. Simply send an email to jp@whitecollaradvice. I'll send it to you. It's a collection of case studies, different from Lessons from Prison, which is written in a linear way from start to end. This is just a collection of case studies. A few quick questions to wrap up. I was asked recently, what book am I reading? I still read a few books a month. I have this obsession with, I don't want to say growing old. I'm 41 now, and I'm getting older, and I feel it. I have some gray hair. My runs are harder, and see my dad's 75. And so I'm reading a book called How to Grow Old by Cicero, helping me understand, I guess, the issue of aging and how quickly time flies. I've been home from prison for 8 years. Frankly, I never thought it would end, and here I am with a wife, family, and career. So How to Grow Old is a book I'm reading. I got an email from someone that asked if I'm in the same shape that I was in prison. In prison, I was running 10 miles a day. I got pretty fit. Probably not the same. I don't exercise as much as I did. I have other interests in my life now, like golf. I'm constantly swinging this golf club during the day. Diet probably isn't as solid. My wife and I have been doing Nutrisystem for a month or two. I was in Ohio over the weekend, and someone asked me how it's going, and I said, well, because I've been to prison and I've had prison food, like Nutrisystem is okay, but if any of you are going to prison and you want to know what the food is like, go to Nutrisystem. I hope there's not any fallout from that. If any of the Nutrisystem lawyers come across that, I hope the food is good. Okay, I'm just telling you, it tastes like food from Taft Federal Prison Camp. So this is the meatballs. Please. Okay, so yeah, I'm trying to stay in shape and diet because of Nutrisystem, but it's a good prep if you want to know what prison food is like. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you very much for watching. I wish you all well. To close, hold that lawyer accountable. Do some things that might seem contrary to what you think is natural, and ensure that those that are going to judge you see you differently than some bad decisions you made. Thank you for your time. Be well. Bye-bye.